There is a massive taboo at times when it comes to being really honest about the mother wound. And that is often because we live in a world that glorifies mothers, and I do think mothers are pretty spectacular in terms of what we do. But this isn't to say that all mothers are created equal or anywhere close, or that you must be anywhere close to perfect to still be a good enough mother. But I have found that those of us who have the mother wound tend to have a lifelong pattern, or at least a childhood pattern, with a mother who pretty consistently was invalidating, led us to believe that love was conditional, that was emotionally unsafe, unpredictable, that was abandoning. Whatever it is, there tends to be a pretty clear pattern. And so I've made a bunch of videos this last week, so please check those out regarding understanding kind of what creates the mother wound and what the legacy of the mother wound is. The problem is we live in a world that often glorifies mothers, and so you're not allowed to mom shame. In fact, any kind of criticism or feedback is often called mom shame. And I think the dilemma is so bad for us as moms because I really do believe that there's no other role in the world that requires you to sacrifice and provide and sort of struggle. Like, I truly believe it's one of the hardest roles on the planet because you're still expected to do all the things outside the world that you're supposed to do inside the world of your home and your family, but we often don't have the support and that we need. And so it is an incredibly complex and difficult role. And so many of us are carrying our own shame, our own trauma, and we want it to be different. And we do our best, but inevitably we make mistakes. And that is like hard when you already have your own traumatic mom wound, let's say, in your childhood. But I really do believe that also being the mom that you didn't have, at least emotionally, and being safe is one of the greatest ways to heal if that is something that you want to do in terms of being a parent, though you don't need to do that to work on healing. But basically, we have this fantasy that, all moms love and they're all good and it's all healthy and it's all safe, and that is just absolutely not true. And so we don't often talk about it. And along those lines, because as I've said in many videos, we have these experiences from the time we're born. We don't even have the language, and it's too scary, too risky to say, maybe I didn't have a good mom. And so many of us just blame ourselves. All of our struggles, our mental health, our physical health, it's all our fault, our sense of self, our distorted selves. And so that kind of plays out in that the world says things like, well, you owe your mom for your life, so you can't talk about her. Don't shame her. She did the best, which is often true, but that doesn't make it okay what often happened to us. That we reinforce that you can't judge her, that you must forgive her no matter what, and that's just not true. You don't necessarily need to forgive people to work on healing, because in some ways I feel like people say, oh, that's for you. But I just don't think that's true, and I don't think that the research supports that we have different ways we can come to healing, but we must somehow forgive her, and that should make it okay. That's just not true. That family is everything at all costs, that we should basically allow toxic, hurtful people in our lives if they're family, that there's some special space for family that isn't okay for others, but is just fine for family. I think we can have more grace for family and more leeway, but if we're talking about a consistent pattern of wounding behavior, that's a different story. And so we're often said, or we're told, to forgive, or it's family, or don't let it bother you, just get over it. That's how they are. It's like, well, yeah, that's how they are. And if you're setting healthy boundaries and distancing yourself and creating new patterns, that's great. But what I found is that many of us just get stuck in these toxic roles with them, where we lean in and try to be close to these kind of mothers and then lean out when they hurt us. And life sometimes makes situations where you need their help, and it gets really sticky, as I've talked about, like childcare, for example. If you're, unhealthy, emotionally unsafe, I was going to say toxic, but that's what it is. Mother is also your primary caregiver for your kids while you go to work, and you have no one else. I mean, look at that is a massive dilemma, and I absolutely understand that one, both personally and professionally. But I would say in those situations, the goal is to then find other ways so that you don't feel tied to them in that way. So I know there are layers of the ties, from the world to our personal lives, to our personal situations, to our financial lives, to just our emotional lives. For many of us, like, I didn't have anybody else. There weren't siblings, there weren't aunts and uncles. And so you have to find a way to keep connection to people. And if you don't have other places to go or other healthy relationships, that makes it hard. So there are all these things that make it hard. The problem is that deep inside, this wound often lives in our soul. And no matter what we know up here, we're often walking around carrying that. And the problem is, in a world that says it's taboo, you can't talk about mothers, the one thing we honestly want to do is be seen and validated for what we're saying happened to us. But if we've internalized all the world's messages or the world is giving them to us, or our partner or our friends, like, oh, she had her own trauma, oh, that's just how she is. And those things are all true. But to the point where you give her more grace than you give yourself and validation, that is where the problem starts, right? It's like, how do you begin to heal if you can't even give yourself validation for what happened to you? And so it plays out in, like I've said in so many videos, in doubting ourselves, in feeling like we're being disloyal to even tell our true story with her, to feeling ashamed that it actually, if I honor it and I admit it, then I have to say, like, I'm embarrassed of this childhood, or I feel ashamed, or that was not what I wanted, and that's really hurtful. We can minimize ourselves by saying, well, we're just too sensitive, or the world says that. Oh, you're just too sensitive, like she's just joking, or they don't mean it, or whatever it is. And so all those layers of the taboo can really block our ability to find and seek and maintain healing. And what I've said in so many of my videos, and I say this in the course I created, especially on narcissistic and borderline parents, the trauma is that you have to deal with the parents you have right now. You can spend all the money in the world and time on therapy, but if you go to therapy and you don't deal with the fact that when you leave the therapy office, that you've just discussed your mother for the whole, 45, 50 minutes or hour, and then you get in the car and call her and she, shames you, blames you, makes inappropriate jokes, whatever it is, pokes at you, or she's rageful and unhappy, or she's great and terrible, you are still living in the mother wound. You are reenacting it and replaying it every time you engage with her. So that has to shift, and it cannot shift until you honor and validate inside that what you experienced matters and is worthy and deserving of healing. So that is the taboo. It's like, don't you dare let yourself question your mother's love. And you are absolutely allowed to question that and to challenge it and to do whatever you need to do to begin to heal your life. So that's it for today. Bella's having nightmares. Please stay safe and well, and I will see you tomorrow.